The congregation in the heart of Savannah fell into a hushed, confused silence. As the heavy oak doors of the cathedral swung open, the light caught a vision in white that rivaled the bride. Elena, the groom's mother, stepped forward. She wasn't wearing a traditional mother-of-the-groom pastel suit. Instead, she was draped in the same shimmering, diamond-studded princess gown she had gazed at through a boutique window decades ago. Her son, Julian, stood at the altar, his face flushing with a mix of confusion and irritation. He looked at his mother, then at his beautiful bride, Maya. The guests whispered behind their programs, their eyes darting between the two women in white. To any outsider, it looked like an act of ultimate sabotage, a desperate grasp for attention from a woman who couldn't let go of her son. But to Elena, it was something else entirely. It was a retrieval of a soul she had left behind in the mountains of Appalachia 26 years ago. The story of this moment didn't start at the altar. It started in a small, judgmental town where a 16-year-old girl was forced to grow up in a single night. Elena had been a bright student with dreams of the big city, but a summer romance with a boy named Caleb changed everything. Caleb had moved away for a family emergency before she could tell him she was pregnant. When her parents found out, the shame was too much for their rigid reputations to bear. They didn't offer a hand, they offered an exit. Cast out with nothing but a few $100s and a cardboard box of clothes, Elena boarded a bus for Georgia. She arrived in Savannah as a ghost, a stranger in a city of blooming magnolias and ancient secrets. She didn't have a husband, a home, or a plan, but she had a heartbeat beneath her ribs that told her to survive. She took the hardest jobs, scrubbed the coldest floors, and promised her unborn son that he would never feel the sting of rejection she had endured. By the time Julian was 10, the scared girl from the mountains was a memory. Elena had transformed herself into a powerhouse. She started a small catering business out of her kitchen, which eventually grew into Elena's Elite Events, the premier catering and floral company in Savannah. She was wealthy, influential, and remarkably young, only 26 when she bought her first mansion. Despite her success, her romantic life was a desert. She was a beautiful woman with a sharp wit and a kind heart, but her life came with conditions. Whenever she dated, the men followed a predictable pattern. At first, they were charmed by her elegance. Then they discovered her wealth and the dozens of employees who looked to her for leadership. The power dynamics shifted, and their egos crumbled. "She's too much," they would say, or "Her son is her whole world, there's no room for a man." They were intimidated by her independence and wary of Julian, fearing they would always play second fiddle to a child who had been her only partner for a decade. One by one, they withdrew, leaving Elena to wonder if her success was a wall that kept love out. Eventually, Elena stopped trying. She decided that Julian was enough. He was her son, her best friend, and in many ways, the man of the house. She poured every ounce of her ambition into his future, enrolling him in the best private academies and planning a life for him that was filled with the stability she had been denied. They were a team of two, a closed circuit of love that no one else could penetrate. Julian grew up without the shadow of a father figure because Elena filled every void. She was the one in the front row at his soccer games and the one who stayed up until 2 a.m. helping him with calculus. To the neighbors, they were the perfect pair. To Julian, she was simply Mom, the woman who could do anything. But as he entered his teenage years, the questions he had suppressed for a decade finally began to surface. It happened on a quiet Tuesday evening while they were having dinner. Julian, now 14 and tall enough to look Elena in the eye, set his fork down. "Mom, do I have a father?" The question hit Elena like a physical blow. She had rehearsed this moment in her head for years, yet she still felt the familiar tightening in her chest. She looked at her son, seeing the traces of Caleb in the set of his jaw and the depth of his eyes. "Of course you do, Julian," she said softly, her voice steadying. "Everyone has a father." "Then where is he? Why isn't he here?" Julian's voice wasn't angry, it was merely curious, which made it hurt more. Elena took a deep breath. She told him the truth, or at least the version a child could carry. She explained that she had been young, that her father had moved away before knowing about the pregnancy, and that her own parents had been unable to accept the situation. I had to choose a new life for us, and Julian, look at us. We are happy. I am your mother, your father, and your biggest fan. You don't lack for anything. Julian walked over and hugged her. He promised her right then that he would never need anyone else as long as he had her. And for a while, that was enough. Their bond grew even stronger, so much so that when they walked through downtown Savannah, tourists often mistook them for a young couple. Elena, still in her early 30s, possessed a youthful glow that defied her history of hardship. However, the father-shaped hole in Julian's life was replaced by a different kind of longing in Elena's. She watched her employees get married, she organized their receptions, and she designed their floral arrangements. She was always the architect of someone else's dream, never the inhabitant of her own. She began to realize that while she had built a kingdom, she was still a queen without a consort, living in a palace built for two but occupied by a heart that felt half-finished. The turning point came at the wedding of her head chef. It was a lavish affair, even by Elena's standards. The bride wore a custom-made silk gown with a cathedral train that seemed to float like a cloud down the aisle. As the music swells and the bride began her walk, Elena felt a sudden, sharp pang in her throat. She was sitting in the front row with Julian, who was now a college student. As the bride passed them, the scent of lilies and the shimmer of the dress triggered a memory Elena hadn't allowed herself to visit in years. She remembered her 16-year-old self imagining a wedding in the village church, wearing a dress she'd seen in a magazine. That girl hadn't wanted a catering empire. She just wanted to be loved out in the open. Unconsciously, tears began to track down Elena's face. She quickly wiped them away with a silk handkerchief, but Julian saw. He reached over and squeezed her hand, his brow furrowed with concern. He didn't say anything then, but later that night, as they sat on the veranda of their home, he asked Elena, "Mom, what happened today? You looked like your heart was breaking." Elena smiled sadly. "I was just being a silly woman, Julian. Seeing her walk down the aisle reminded me of a dream I used to have, a dream that died a long time ago. I always wanted to be a bride. I wanted that moment where the world stops and someone looks at me like I'm the only thing that matters." "It's not a dead dream," Julian insisted. "You're still young. You can meet someone tomorrow." "No," Elena shook her head. "Men in this town see me as a boss or a package with a grown son. The door is closed, Julian, and that's okay. I have you." Julian didn't argue, but a seed was planted in his mind. He realized that his mother's strength had been a mask for a deep, unfulfilled yearning. He saw for the first time that his mother wasn't just a provider. She was a woman who had skipped her own youth to ensure he had his. He vowed to himself that if he ever had the chance, he would give that moment back to her. When Julian left for the university, the silence in the Savannah mansion was deafening. For the first time in 20 years, Elena was truly alone. She found herself wandering into his room, touching the books on his shelf and feeling like a widow who had lost her husband. Her life had been so centered on him that without his presence, her business felt like a chore rather than a triumph. She couldn't stay away. Within a week, she drove 3 hours to visit him at his dorm. She arrived with bags of home-cooked food and dark circles under her eyes. Julian was shocked to see her looking so fragile. "Mom, I've only been gone 7 days," he laughed, though he hugged her tightly. "I just needed to make sure you were eating," she lied, her voice trembling. "The house is so big, Julian. It's too big for one person." Julian realized then that their bond was a double-edged sword. Their closeness had protected them, but it had also prevented Elena from building a life that didn't revolve around him. He encouraged her to go back to Savannah and try to find a hobby, or perhaps finally date again. But Elena just smiled and promised to try. She didn't try. Instead, she became a helicopter mother, visiting every weekend until Julian's roommates started calling him the golden child. Julian didn't mind the teasing. He knew how much she had sacrificed, but he also knew he needed to grow up, and she needed her to find a happiness that he couldn't provide. Years passed and Julian graduated, moving into his own apartment in the city and starting a career in finance. He was successful, handsome, and compassionate, a testament to Elena's upbringing. But the dynamic was shifting. Julian was no longer just her son. He was becoming a man with his own life, and soon he would introduce a third person into their exclusive circle, a person who would test the limits of Elena's grace. The news came over a Sunday brunch. "Mom, I'm getting married," Julian said, his eyes glowing with a light Elena hadn't seen before. Elena froze, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. "Married? To whom? Since when?" "Her name is
Maya," Julian explained. "We've been dating for 2 years. I wanted to wait until I was sure before I introduced you. I know how protective you are, and I wanted this to be perfect." 2 years? Elena felt a sting of betrayal. Her son had kept a secret from her for 2 years? But she swallowed her hurt and forced a smile. "If she makes you happy, Julian, then she is already family to me." Maya was a school teacher with a gentle spirit and a keen eye for people. She'd heard all the stories about Elena, the legendary mother who was as tough as nails and as clingy as ivy. Maya was terrified of meeting her. She expected a woman who would view her as a rival, someone who would scrutinize her every move. Instead, when they finally met, Elena overwhelmed her with affection. She cooked Maya's favorite meals, bought her expensive jewelry, and treated her like a long-lost daughter. It was almost too much. Elena would call Maya every day, asking about her health, her work, and her plans for the future. Maya was confused. Was this genuine love, or was it a tactical move to keep her close? "She's just lonely, Maya," Julian assured his fiancée. "She's never had a sister or a mother of her own. She's pouring everything she has into you because you're the woman I chose." Maya decided to lean into it. She realized that Elena didn't want to fight her. She wanted to join her. As they began to plan the wedding, Maya made a radical decision. She would involve Elena in every single detail. She would give Elena the wedding experience the older woman had never had, even if it meant sharing the spotlight. The wedding preparations were in full swing. Maya and Elena spent every weekend scouting venues, tasting cakes, and choosing flowers. One afternoon, they visited a high-end bridal boutique on Broughton Street. Maya tried on several dresses, but she kept noticing Elena's eyes wandering toward a specific gown in the corner. It was a princess-cut dress, encrusted with tiny crystals that caught the light like fallen stars. It was classic, timeless, and completely impractical for a woman in her 40s. "Go ahead, Elena, try it on. You're still so young and beautiful. I want to see you in it." Elena laughed, blushing like a schoolgirl. "Oh, Maya, don't be ridiculous. I'm the mother of the groom. I should be looking at navy blue lace or charcoal silk." "Just for me," Maya pleaded. Elena gave in. When she stepped out of the dressing room, the boutique went silent. She looked breathtaking. The dress hugged her curves and made her skin glow. For a moment, she wasn't the catering queen or Julian's mom. She was just a woman, standing in the light of her own beauty. She looked in the mirror and saw the 16-year-old girl she used to be, finally getting her wish. "I feel like I can finally breathe," Elena whispered. She took the dress off and returned it to the rack, but that night she couldn't sleep. The image of herself in that gown haunted her. She felt a desperate, irrational need to own it. A few days later, without telling anyone, she went back to the boutique and bought it. She told herself it was just for her collection, a memento of a dream, but deep down, a plan was forming. A plan that would either be a beautiful tribute or a social disaster. Maya saw the change in Elena. She seemed lighter, more energized. When the day of the wedding arrived, Elena vanished early in the morning, claiming she had back-end logistics to handle for the catering. Julian and Maya didn't think twice about it. They were too busy in the whirlwind of their own nerves. They had no idea that Elena was in a private suite, stepping into the crystal-encrusted gown and pinning a veil into her hair. The ceremony was halfway through when the murmur began. Julian and Maya were standing at the altar, preparing to exchange their vows, when Elena appeared at the back of the church. She walked down the aisle with her head held high, looking every bit like a bride herself. Julian's face went pale. "Mom, what are you doing?" he hissed as she reached the front. Elena leaned in and whispered, "Julian, please, I just want to feel what it's like, just for today. I won't take anything away from Maya, I promise. I just need to stand here." Julian was furious. He felt his mother had finally crossed the line from loving to obsessive. He was about to tell her to leave when Maya reached out and took Elena's hand. Maya looked her husband in the eye and shook her head. "It's okay, Julian," Maya whispered. "Let her stay. She's not a rival, she's a guest of honor. If this is what she needs to be whole, then we give it to her." The tension in the room broke. The minister, sensing the grace in Maya's gesture, continued with the service. Elena stood just behind the couple, a silent, shimmering presence. At the reception, Elena continued the theme, changing into a stunning white dinner gown when Maya changed into hers. Maya's mother was horrified. "She's insane, Maya. She's trying to be the bride at her own son's wedding." "No, Mom," Maya replied calmly. "She's finally finishing a story that was interrupted 26 years ago. Let her have her piece." Elena was overwhelmed with gratitude. She realized that Maya wasn't just a daughter-in-law, she was a healer. But the day was about to get even stranger. During the honeymoon planning, Elena made a request that pushed even Julian's limits. "Can I go to Maui with you? I've never seen the Pacific. I promise I'll stay in my own room." Julian exploded. "Absolutely not. That's where I draw the line." But Maya, ever the diplomat, pulled him aside. "Julian, let her stay. She's never had a honeymoon. She's never had a vacation that wasn't about you. Let's take her. We have a private villa. She'll be in the guest house. Please." Julian groaned, but he couldn't say no to Maya, and so the trio set off for Hawaii. Maui was a dream. Just as she promised, Elena kept her distance. She spent her days walking the black sand beaches and her evenings reading on her balcony. She watched Julian and Maya from afar, her heart full of a bittersweet joy. She was happy for them, but seeing their romance emphasized the void in her own life. One afternoon, Maya found Elena sitting by the shoreline. "There's a tradition here," Maya said, handing Elena a small wooden box and a piece of paper. "It's the hope box. You write down your deepest wish, lock it in the box, and the ocean is supposed to carry the energy of it until it comes true." Elena thought it was a tourist gimmick, but she participated anyway. Secretly, she wrote, "I want to be seen, not as a mother, not as a boss, but as a woman worthy of a first love." She tucked the paper into the box and watched as Maya did the same. They left the boxes on a sacred rock formation, a secret between the two women. The trip ended, and they returned to Georgia. Elena felt a sense of closure. She had worn the dress, she had seen the ocean, and she had seen her son happy. She prepared to return to her quiet life in Savannah, but fate had one more card to play. On the drive back from the airport, Elena's car broke down near a small town she hadn't visited in decades. She pulled into a local diner to wait for a tow truck. As she sat at the counter, the bell above the door chimed. A man walked in, his hair graying at the temples, but his eyes as familiar as her own reflection. It was Caleb. He froze when she saw her. The coffee pot in the waitress's hand shook. 26 years of silence evaporated in a single heartbeat. "Caleb," Elena breathed. He sat down next to her and the story poured out. He had come back to her village weeks after she left, but her parents told him she had moved away and didn't want to be found. He had spent his life as an architect, successful, but haunted by the girl he had lost. He was a widower now, living in a nearby town, still carrying a faded photo of her in his wallet. Caleb didn't let her go this time. He followed her back to Savannah, and within weeks, they were inseparable. He was the only man who wasn't intimidated by her success because he remembered the girl who had nothing. He saw the catering queen and loved her, but he worshipped the Elena who survived the mountains. Elena was terrified to tell him about Julian. She took him to Julian and Maya's house one evening, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Caleb, there's something you need to know. I didn't just move to Savannah. I moved here to have your son." The revelation broke Caleb. He looked at Julian, a grown man, a mirror image of his own youth, and wept. He apologized for the years he'd missed, for the burden Elena had carried alone. Julian, coached by Maya's endless supply of empathy, didn't hold a grudge. He saw the way his mother looked at Caleb, like a parched land finally receiving rain. "I don't want to miss another day," Caleb declared. A month later, he proposed to Elena in the middle of her favorite rose garden. This time, there was no hesitation. This time, there was no assuming. Elena said yes before he could even finish the sentence. The news spread through Savannah like wildfire. The Ice Queen was finally getting married. Maya was the first to start the planning. "Mother, we have a wedding to organize," she laughed, "and this time you're the only one in white." Elena felt a strange sense of vertigo. She was 46 years old. Was she too old for a big wedding? Was it proper? But Julian stepped in, taking his mother's hands. "Mom, you stood behind me at my wedding because you wanted to share the joy. Now I'm going to stand behind you. I'm going to walk you down the aisle and hand you to the man who should have been there all along." The planning began, but it wasn't just a wedding, it was a family reunion. Caleb worked with Julian to build a life in Savannah, and Maya acted as the bridge between all of them. But as the date approached, Maya had one more surprise for Elena, a secret she had kept since the trip to Maui. A week before the wedding, Maya invited Elena over for tea. She looked radiant, her skin glowing with a particular health. "Mother, do you remember the Hope Box in Maui?" Elena nodded. "I think about it often." Maya reached into her bag and pulled out a small sonogram photo. "My wish was for you to finally have the family you deserved, and God added a little extra. I'm pregnant, Elena. You're going to be a grandmother." Elena burst into tears, happy tears this time. The cycle was complete. She had started as a single mother with nothing, and now she was a successful woman, a bride-to-be, and a grandmother-to-be. "I thought my life was over at 16, she sobbed. "I thought I was just a supporting character in Julian's life." "You were always the protagonist, Elena," Maya said. "We were just waiting for the right chapter." The wedding was the event of the season. Elena wore a new gown, not the one she had bought in secret, but a custom-designed masterpiece that Caleb had helped sketch. It wasn't a princess dress. It was a queen dress. It was elegant, sophisticated, and bold. As she stood at the back of the same cathedral where Julian had married Maya, Elena felt no nervousness. She looked at Julian, who stood ready to walk her down the aisle. She looked at Maya, who was glowing in the front row. And she looked at the altar, where Caleb stood waiting with a look of pure, unadulterated adoration. The doors opened. The music started. But this time, the murmurs weren't about a mother overstepping her bounds. They were about a woman who had finally come home to herself. Every step Elena took was a step away from the shame of her past, and a step into the light of her future. When Caleb handed her hand to Elena, he whispered, "You did it, Mom. You're finally the bride." The honeymoon was a quiet affair this time, just Elena and Caleb in a small cottage in the Blue Ridge Mountains, not far from where they had first met. They spent the month talking, healing, and rediscovering the people they had become. Elena realized that the wedding gown wasn't about the fabric or the crystals. It was about the permission to be happy. When they returned to Savannah, life took on a new rhythm. Elena didn't retire, but she learned to delegate. She spent more time in her garden and less time in her office.
When Maya gave birth to a healthy baby girl, they named her Alara, a tribute to the woman who would pave the way for all of them. Elena would often sit in her nursery rocking the baby and telling her stories. Not stories of hardship, but stories of resilience. She told Alara about the magic box in Hawaii and the white dress that waited 26 years to be worn. One evening, as the sun set over the Savannah River, Julian and Caleb sat on the porch watching Elena and Maya laugh together in the kitchen. I used to think women were crazy about weddings. I didn't get why it mattered so much. Caleb smiled, watching his wife. It's not the wedding, Julian. It's the declaration. It's the moment a woman says, I am here, I am loved, and I am starting over. Some of us just take a little longer to get to the starting line. Elena looked out the window and saw the two men in her life, the one she had raised and the one she had found again. She smoothed her dress, a simple linen piece this time, and felt a profound sense of peace. The girl from the mountains was gone, replaced by a woman who knew that time doesn't steal your dreams, it just seasons them. She was Elena. She was a mother, a mogul, and a wife. But most importantly, she was finally, beautifully, whole. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire, teach, and entertain. Until next time, bye!